Hello everyone, it's Maureen. And this time I wanted to give you more of a view of the business end of my spinning wheel. You're going to be seeing my feet and my hands in this particular video. We have our blue roving. This is 100% wool. And as you can see, the spool, which is this, is pretty much nearly full. So I'm just going to finish this off. And I'm going to go over some of the parts of a spinning wheel, but more close up than what I was discussing actually in past videos. We're having some technical difficulties here. It wants to go one way, but it doesn't want to go the other. Sometimes that happens. Nope. I'll just feed on some of my wool here. There we go. Just being a little bit difficult today. So what I'm doing is basically pulling the yarn, or creating yarn rather, and pulling the fibers away from the rest of the roving as they twist to control the thickness of the yarn that I'm creating. My goal is to make pretty thin yarn here, so we're talking like stockinette weight. But I don't want it to be too thin, because the thinner it is, the more likely it will also break. This is going to be plied, because I won't be able to put all of the roving that I have, and I have a second very large ball of roving, about a pound of it. And I'm not going to be able to put all of that on this spool because we're nearly full already. So I will probably have 2 or 3 spools of single ply yarn. And then what I do, and what I wanted to show you, was how you ply. We do have a kitty also that is deciding that she wants to be in frame, so you may see Star walk in and out of frame. But the parts of the spinning wheel that I am discussing with you today, and you're sort of getting a overhead shot, so somewhat of the same view that I get when I'm spinning. This whole area here is called the Maiden. It basically holds 2 upright pieces that hold the working parts of the spinning wheel. And I'll stop just so you have this to view here. I'll just fish this on. So this opening back here is called the orifice. It's basically where the yarn itself will go through the opening where the twist is created, and then is normally hooked up to one of these hooks on the side here. And these basically control where the yarn is being loaded onto the spool. And we're pretty much full. We're going to finish off this back area. We can't really go beyond the edge of our spool itself. So those hooks, of course, control where the yarn is being loaded. When I change a spool, which I'll show you, when I change the spool out, I load in the middle first. So I use one of these two hooks. Load that up, make sure that there's enough on there, and then I start moving it all the way to the end and then all the way back. And I keep going back and forth as I load my spool, so it is evenly loaded. It also, when you have an evenly loaded spool, it makes it easier when you're taking the yarn off the spool, so that you're not getting it spinning around on the floor like crazy if it's loose. In this case, on this spinning wheel, right down here near my knees, is what they call a lazy Kate. And what that is basically, it's prongs on the front, very heavy metal prongs that hold spools in place so you can keep empty ones there, or load up full ones to ply, which I'll show you in a little bit. Hello, how are you? I have an audience sitting next to me right here. She's gonna be, as I said, walking in and out of frame. So I'm doing something and I'm also talking, so that means that there's attention to be had. Jace is sitting on the couch actually over that direction. Just watching. Yes. I love you too. My newer spinning wheels definitely are much quieter. They have this gentle whirring sound that I absolutely love. It's very relaxing. And that's just the normal operation of the spinning wheel. This is a normal noise that one gets. On occasion, every few months, and depending on how much you use your spinning wheel, there are points in which that you would want to oil. You would want to keep these tabs, because there is a steel rod that kind of runs through this piece, the center of this piece, to hold the spool in place. And you want to make sure that that steel rod has a bit of lubrication on it. Not a lot, just a little bit, and you only need a little bit every few months. The other portion that you would want to oil, and this spinning wheel has a really neat way of doing that. There's an opening right here on the wheel itself where you could put a drop of oil down to the center metal portion, which will keep it lubricated from squeaking. This portion also here, like this joint, that joint, and then maybe a little bit in here, could also be lubricated with some oil. I haven't lubricated this since I bought it. It really hasn't needed it because I can kind of see the sheen of a little bit of oil already on it. But if it was squeaking or making noise, then I would end up putting a little bit of oil on it. Now this is an Ashford wheel. You don't necessarily need to use the name brand oil, but I've been using this oil with all of my spinning wheels, which ends up being Ashford spinning wheel oil. It's not a sponsored video. I just happen to like the viscosity of the oil that they have for any of my spinning wheels and other such items that need this sort of lubrication every once in a while. But just about most machine oils would do the same thing. You would just want to make sure that it's, you know, relatively clear. This one says it's non-staining, it's high grade, convenient reusable spout, which is nice because the spout looks like that. Needs a little cleaning actually. It's been in my basket for a while. And this has 100, I think 100 milliliters, MLS. Ashford wheels are made in New Zealand, so this is also a New Zealand product. Let's see, that's where we're at so far. I had a question the other day at my SCA demo of why do I turn the wheel first before actually getting on the treadles. I have bad knees actually, and I've had bad knees for a while, since about my mid-20s or so. So for me, getting the wheel started a little bit actually helps my knees not necessarily have to tramp down very hard on the pedals on the bottom. This wheel, unlike the medieval versions, uses 2 pedals instead of 1. I like to spin in my stocking feet. I find it more comfortable because I can feel the pedals underneath as compared to wearing a pair of shoes. So I tend to wear my socks and spin. Now this wheel is one of my newest ones. I was looking for a workhorse spinning wheel where it had many different spools. The other spinning wheel I have of a very similar style only has 4 spools with it. This one happens to have a total of, let's see, there's 3 here, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 11 spools altogether is what it looks like I have, which is great for being able to produce a whole bunch of yarn. And if I really wanted to, Ashford still makes the spools, so I could technically go buy more if I wanted to. And they're not that expensive. You could easily find a second-hand seller that's selling them at a lower price, or if you wanted to buy them direct from Ashford, sometimes they do run specials. But coming from New Zealand, that means that you would be paying for. And we're back. Apologize there. The camera only lets me drone on for every so often. But what I was saying, the supply chain doesn't seem that it's going to come back the way that it was, so I'm going to be avoiding buying things internationally unless absolutely necessarily possible. Which is unfortunate because I used to get a few things, especially from Great Britain, every once in a great while. But what are you going to do? Sometimes if there's a thin spot, I'll go back through with the edge of my roving and thicken that spot up just a little bit. Since wool likes to grab onto itself, it actually makes it very easy to do this method and be able to produce a certain amount of consistency. And I can go as fast or as slow as I want because I'm really controlling the twist with my hands. So allowing more yarn to draft on or less if I choose. We're almost there. One thing I've noticed also with the wool, no matter how clean it is, sometimes you will get accumulation. Like right here, I'm going to have to dust my spinning wheel a little bit. It's good to keep them dust free also because then you don't have to oil it near as much because the dust can build up on your metal pieces and make it more difficult for it to operate properly. But if you haven't used your spinning wheel in a while, I recommend giving it a nice, small, fresh bit of oil. Will definitely keep it from getting squeaky. Sometimes if it really creates a chunky piece, you can just gently pull it apart and it'll start creating a thinner piece. Depending on how much twist is in it. The more twist that is in the roving as it twists into yarn, a little bit more difficult it becomes to pull it apart to thin it out. So one does have to keep an eye on that. this knob here basically allows the end of this, there's a clear nylon-like item with a spring right here that holds the tension down on the wheel. There's a little knob right here also that controls the tension, which is underneath. And our spool is pretty much complete. So what I'm going to do is pull the end of my yarn, make sure it's twisted as much as it can. The end is always going to be a little loose like that. I'm going to feed the rest of it on to the spool, pulling it through. Now this piece, as I said, is always going to be just a little loose. And what I'm going to do, actually, there's a opening right here. So I pull this up off to the side, take off the nylon, and replace the spool. I have one of these nice ones right here. The wider end goes towards this side back here. Just slide on the new one. Oop. Put the nylon on. Plop it back into the opening. Now you're going to hear a little rustling. I'm going to be looking for some yarn that I had from earlier, which it looks like I'm going to have to use a piece from down here, which is okay. Alright, what this is a piece of already spun yarn that was on one of the spools to start with. There's our completed spool, by the way. Nice and evenly loaded. And just for comparison's sake, we have these other ones. What I am going to show you now is how to ply. So what I'm doing, where the spool was over here, I am going to put the two spools that I want to ply together. I have a basket that I'm keeping everything in, but I do need a lead yarn. So what I do with the lead yarn is I tie it in the middle, just with a typical square knot, nothing exciting here. But I do make sure that the tension is pretty good on this square knot if possible. There we go. Now I said I'd like to do the middle, so I'm going to pick one of these two hooks. And then this is how you fish your yarn basically through your orifice, which starts here and comes out the front over here. So this is a hook. With a spinning wheel, this is an important item that you want to have. This one happens to be tied on with a piece of tape so it doesn't get lost. My other spinning wheel has a little hole that it actually lives in, and it was part of the spinning wheel to start with. So there's a little divot right here. So I pull the yarn down into the hole, make sure to hook it on the hook, and then gently pull it through the orifice. And that's threaded now. Just let my hook dangle. It's dangling out of the way, so it's not going to hit anything. The next step is finding the end, which is fairly easy because it's a bit looser, on my already spun spools. Now, could you knot this on the end of your lead yarn? Yes, you could, but you don't want to create lumps and bumps if you don't have to. So this one is more in the middle, and you'll notice that this is a bit more variegated. There's bits of purple in this yarn. Because I am going to be creating fabric eventually, I'm going to try to keep my colors relatively the same. So what I'm doing is sort of drafting off very similar pieces But I'm not going to start at the end of my lead thread. I'm going to start in the middle. I want these to wrap around my lead thread as much as possible to help me be able to load it on to the spool. As you can see, it starts to twist around the lead thread, and then these start to ply together. And it's starting to load. Now if it starts to get a little bit where I'm seeing extra bits, I try to pull some of that off a little bit to create a smoother yarn if I can. Plying's a little bit more difficult because you'll sometimes get these twisty portions depending on your tension, like that right there. So one of the things that I'll do if I start getting a whole bunch of twisty portions is let it sort of untwist and really curl on the other side. And you're basically playing a lot more tug of war when you're plying your yarn. So for me, plying is something that does take a little bit of practice as well. And when I'm problem solving, like I'm doing here, I'm not going to necessarily go full bore because I'm trying to make even twists and also work out the other spare twisties that are happening. Like that's a twisty that is twisting upon itself instead of twisting with the other yarn. So sometimes it takes a little bit of doing. But because of the Lazy Kate in the front of this spinning wheel, I'm able to ply 2 and 3 pieces of yarn. They have 3 spools here that technically I could pull from if I wanted to. And as I am loading the yarn, just trying to create even tension. There we go. I want to create twist, but I really don't need to create a lot of twist, just enough to keep the 2 pieces of yarn together. All right. As you can see, I'm trying to load very evenly as well. Now, as I was saying, twisties is my term that I use for what's going on. I'm sure there's probably an official term that I'm unaware of for when you're plying and one of your spools is misbehaving. I'm going to put this one over here and see if maybe that'll help. Because my goal is not to create lumps and bumps in my yarn. Some people like that texture. I'm not particularly a fan. If I'm going to use this yarn on any of my weaving, I want it to be smooth. So for me, twisties are not a good thing. Probably hearing somebody outside with a chainsaw. So I'm guessing someone's doing some fall pruning. That poor tree. But as you can see, as I am pulling and plying, I'm creating a smoother yarn with less bumps in it as much as possible. Just by controlling the tension back here and getting less of a problem on the spool itself, which is very important, because if you're looking for a smooth product, you want it to be smooth on the spool, because when you're drafting it off on a nitty naughty or a skein winder like reel, you really want that to be your finished product. You want it to look the way that you want it to look. You don't want to necessarily be producing a product that you're unpleased with. Now, there definitely is a learning curve, as in with anything with fiber arts. No, you know, I'm trying to go backwards. This is some of the reason why I also, we're going backwards, and that's what happens when it wants to go backwards. It creates twisties. Oh, we're wrapped around. That's why I was giving it trouble. So we'll go back here. There we go. So I'm just trying to create even amounts of yarn as well, is the other tricky part. Now sometimes, depending on how your tension is, you might end up creating a bit too much twist. So you do have to be careful a little bit. Because you also don't want to break yarns as well. That's the other part that gets tricky too. Finding that right amount of tensile strength, because that's what it is, and that's what one's yarns do is you're creating additional tensile strength by having your yarns plied together. Here we go. So this one requires me controlling twist a different way by drafting it off with one hand and pulling with the other. I would say that purples have been more of my favorite color as of late, but I enjoy a wonderful rainbow of fiber art colors. We're getting little bits of twisties, but not too bad. So this is sort of a berry with a berry color red with a purple mixed in. Just really nice color combination. We have two of them that broke, so I'm going to have to tie them together. Otherwise, they're going to just have these loose tails, which is going to be a problem. And just to back it off a bit, I'm just going to undo the twist a little bit and just incorporate it together, just like that. Sometimes you'll have too much strength for one of your yarns. You'll get it where it'll snap, or it'll be too thin. That was the other thing when I was talking about on the other spool about creating yarn that was too thin, because when you're plying it, it could snap like that. So there is challenges in the plying process and in the spinning process. Because one doesn't want to overspin your yarn either, because that'll make it more prone to snapping as well. I'm just looking to make sure that I'm creating even amounts. So that is a little overview of the business end of the spinning wheel, how to load a spool, how to change a spool, the different names of the different parts of the spinning wheel, and a little bit on how to ply yarn with at least 2 individual yarns being spun together. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. I upload every other Friday, and we have fun here. Bye-bye.